pass you over to the ladies themselves. Round of applause, please.
Hi. So I was lucky enough to grow up in a house where I was given art materials very early on and grew up around constant creating. Now, let's unpick this. What do I mean by art materials? I mean scraps of paper and glue. My mum would give me old magazines and wrapping paper, and I would create collage after collage, all to be shown and displayed on the kitchen walls. Heaven forbid if something became damaged and greasy and ended up in the bin. I would be outraged that my work had been neglected. Now, this is demonstrative of the ways in which my creating was validated. I was never made to feel that my work was naive or crude, and my mother and grandmother would engage me in a discussion about what I had made, discussing elements like the textures used, the colours I had selected, etc. This is hugely important as it meant I was given the same critique as an adult artist. My creative choices were discussed, and this gave me confidence in making, as well as a language with which to use when making works like composition, texture, colour, medium. All of these terms should be in conversations we're having with young children about art. It's not really enough to show your children art. You have to immerse them in it, stand before a painting, and discuss what might happen next. Discuss what the artist is trying to show us and why. One good way into these conversations is to present the idea that a painting is a moment frozen in time. What can we see? What do we think the character would be like if we were to meet them, etc. And engaging children in the arts is about a lot more than tokenistic gallery trips. It needs to be about empowering them to feel that these cultural spaces are for them. And there are lots of ways you can do that. You can always take a pencil and paper to galleries, and a cushion if you can. Let them choose their favourite artwork and sit in front of it. Choose an element and observe it. What is it? What is it made of? What different colours can we see? And what shades within these colours? How does it make us feel? What do you think the artist was feeling when she painted this? These are just a few ways into a discussion. Some of my earliest memories of making are with my mother and grandmother. We never had much money and moved around a lot, but the one constant was that we always made together. Not having any money meant that my mum was very resourceful and thrifty, and she instilled in me the mentality of, you want it? Make it, which was very frustrating at times, but it shaped me in so many ways. For me and my mother, making was a coping mechanism. We've been going through so much turmoil, and in many ways I had a very traumatic childhood. But the art of making gave me a language through which to express myself, a toolkit for handling difficult situations, and an outlet for all of my emotions, something I would go as far as to say as has saved my life. When at 17, I had a psychotic episode and was hospitalised. We returned again to the healing methods of my infancy. We sat side by side once again and lost ourselves in craft. It was a beautiful way of forging new bonds. Me, the young woman at the cusp of adulthood, and my unrelenting mother, a new era for a relationship, solidified with potato printing and sequin stitching. The most important things when making with children are your attitude, language, and materials. Firstly, let me begin by instating the mentality that the world is a canvas. Opportunities to make are everywhere, if only you look with a curious eye and a sense of wonderment at your surroundings. Now, many of us can feel that art is expensive, that we don't have the money for materials, and we're not artists ourselves, so how can we be makers? Your first step is to see art not as creating a product or final artwork, but instead relish the beauty of the process, the beauty of play. When we stop viewing art as being about a finished piece and pay attention to process, the joy of making is released, and we are released from the binds of aesthetics and instead allowed freedom of expression. One key anecdote is a story my grandmother told me about a little boy that she worked with. This child would stand in front of a blank page with two paintbrushes, one in each hand, and from a distance he would appear to be scribbling all over the page in a fast, uncontrolled manner until the colours merged into brown and the paper, soggy, disintegrated completely. He would then begin the process again, red brush in one hand, blue in the other, scribbling frantically. It was only when my grandmother stepped closer and quietly observed him that she saw the meaning imbued in his practice. The two separate colours represented two cars, a red car and a blue car, and the two cars were travelling across the page. She could hear him making racing noises as the cars zoomed over the paper, and she realised that this was not wasted paper or a messy scribble, but in fact a piece of performance art, a real-time speed chase illustrated through paint. Now this story illuminates the ways in which it's actually us as adults that have to learn to be creative again. The children already have the urge to make and create in an interdisciplinary way. And we adults, well, I'm speaking for myself and maybe some of you, but we've had a lot of our natural curiosity and urge to create confidently stinted by school. As school is now an environment where we are taught to be afraid of making mistakes, taught that mistakes are a terrible thing to be avoided at all costs, and schools champion perfectionism and allow very little room for experimentation that leads to creative thinking. It is our jobs as adults to undo years of being told that art is making something look like something, and instead regain the mindset that art is a diverse language and a tool of expression. Art with Children is all about inviting an invitation to investigate and explore, to experiment with materials and engage in messy play. Now, this ideology is not something I've created, but is influenced heavily by the Reggio Emilia pedagogical approach, something which my grandmother has studied and practiced for over 20 years, and I've co-facilitated as a support volunteer at the Reggio Italia in the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester. Now, the principles of Reggio are a wonderful framework for instigating creative play. At their most basic, they involve all materials being easily accessible to children, stored at a height they can reach. Now, all of you parents are probably thinking, oh my God. But I mean, this means being selective with what you present. So perhaps selecting colours that will mix well as opposed to all paints out at once. Or playing with material qualities, thinking about weight, size, tactility, scent, engaging the senses through interaction. Light and shadow are very important, with natural light always being preferable. And space to be messy is crucial. Cover your walls and floors in paper or sheets, allowing free expression and move away from the rigid constraints of making when only sat at a table. Collect everyday objects and repurpose them. Dish scrubbers dipped in paint make great marks. String wiggled through paint, then across a page to print. And trays of glitter and rice to separate and stroke to soothe. Once you actively focus on remembering once again how to play yourself, you will never view the objects in your house in the same way again, and opportunities to make will come thick and fast. Learning how to play just means letting go of control and relaxing into the mindset that the world is there for exploring. Mess. Yes, children should be messy. They should be allowed to be messy and in fact encouraged to be messy. Putting a large sheet down in your making space is a good safeguard for that, and having a making outfit is also recommended. Now that we've opened our minds to making, how can we encourage little ones and keep them focused? Well, the crucial crux is to instating a creative relationship is the language used when making. I've touched on this already when discussing critique and work with artistic terms, but just want to reiterate that nothing needs dumbing down for children. You don't need to use a cutesy voice and call their work sweet or nice. In fact, please ban the word nice immediately, I'm begging you. The most important thing to remember when collaborating creatively is that often you don't actually need to say much at all. Think before you speak. Is what you're saying going to make the child self-conscious? The phrase, what are you going to make? What are you making? What is it? Might come naturally to us, but can actually be really, really unhelpful and kind of should be eliminated if possible. Instead, replace it with something like, can you tell me a bit about what you're making? This shifts the discussion from a pressured guiding statement into an open-ended discussion. Often we don't know what we're making. We're experimenting and exploring materials. So forcing us to define what we're doing is actually inhibiting the creative flow and applies pressure to make the work a thing instead of allowing it to just exist outside the constraints of having to be a recognised object. Finally, be prepared for frustration. Be prepared to move the activity on by adding another level of interaction. And I can't impart to you how to do that. It's something that just comes with time spent making. You just have to be ready and engaged to respond with a new round of materials and move the exercise on. Now we're just going to go over to Elizabeth for some practical suggestions.
Hi. So to illustrate what Jasmine has discussed and to help you to put these ideas into practice, we're going to run a simple mark making workshop. We have some quick examples of ways to engage with tools that you can make from bits and bobs lying around the house or materials that you can source easily and cheaply. Foodstuffs from the kitchen are great to use as printing ink. It's exciting to mix things up, and by nature, homemade inks are non-toxic. Some examples: spices mixed with water, vibrant colours such as turmeric are great. Gravy browning can be watered down to different shades. Red cabbage, beetroot, ketchup, chilli powder, ground up sweets, anything with a vibrant colour to stain a sheet of paper. All of our examples include use of homemade tools, which is a means to be resourceful and also to save money. Collecting materials is also an adventure, but make it clear that foraging should be supervised. Look for different textures. Almost anything can be used to dip into ink and print with. String coiled around a stick, bendy hair curlers, scourers, sponges, toothbrush, fabric, forks and bits from the garden. So, we're going to discuss some ways of using these homemade tools and how to collaborate creatively with your child. Exploring the world around you through art involves engaging the senses other than just sight and visual observation. How can art be a form of expression? Once you have your materials and tools sorted, now it's time to engage and explore. Try drawing your face with your eyes closed, just by feeling it with your fingers. When using touch, certain features can feel bigger or smaller in proportion than they actually are. This way of thinking about art is about observing and reacting to the world around you, and it doesn't need to all be visually. Now to think of alternative ways of drawing other than a 2B pencil or a pen. One way is to take some charcoal or chalks and tape one to each finger. Now try drawing the other hand or a different body part, but using all 5 fingers at once. This way of doing art really helps to loosen up and get away from the idea that art has to be neat and realistic. The results are often more illustrative and stylised in a way that drawing traditionally would be. Another interesting way of creating art with your child is to think of a journey that they've made today. Could this be your journey here or on another day, simply your journey out of bed and your morning routine? Draw how it felt from start to finish. We're not physically mapping out the route with photographic imagery. We have Google Maps for that. Think about the speed of the journey. Were you rushing or ambling at a nice pace? Was the route you took busy? Was it loud or quiet, hectic or bustling? How were you feeling? Ask these questions with your kids as prompts rather than definitive guidelines. These are ways to engage with your child and have them making abstract art that makes sense to them, and thus helping them to explore the world around them through mark making. Encourage kids to use tools that reflect their observations about the journey. For example, dip a string in ink and drag it across slowly for a calm bus ride. This is a chance to think about the performative nature of art. Not all creativity is happening on paper. Some more ideas for immersive and alternative making. If you find yourself in a park, you can collect sticks and leaves and arrange them on the path to create patterns and shapes. Go to an old graveyard with thin white paper and fat crayons and do rubbings of fonts on tombstones and leaves. At home, clear a space on the floor and create a person by laying clothes flat on the floor. Discuss what the person is like, where they are going and what they might be called. Slice vegetables and use the shapes to dip in paint and print. Garden sticks and flowers dipped in paint and then pressed on paper also create prints. So with these ideas, we have 2 huge rolls of paper and inks here, and if anyone wants to come and have a play around and put some of these ideas into practice, and most importantly ask us any questions, we do have a little bit longer to be able to do this. So some of the tools are attached to cheap bamboo garden canes with wire. This then creates a long handle which allows for exaggerated expression with the hand. All of these tools are things that are cheaply found around the home. This loosens things up and allows for a more playful and spontaneous exploration. You can try drawing each other, really look and see what features stand out. Don't worry if it doesn't look like you. It's not supposed to. That's what a photograph is for. This is about observing and exploring with mark-making tools and capturing an essence of what the child thinks of the person they are studying. Notice how drawing makes you take time to look at things a different way, if only for a few seconds. We hope that you will be able to use these ideas as a springboard to enable you to interact creatively with your kids. Wednesday's Child is all about making for mind's sake, and we believe that giving children a visual language with which to express and explore themselves is a fantastic practice to have as part of their toolkit of ways to manage mental health peaks and troughs in childhood as well as in later life.
Does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for these wonderful, wonderful people here today? Yes.
All of the examples, are they online anywhere if anyone wants to look through later and write down ideas?
No, but we can make them available.
We have little business cards if anyone wants to grab a little card then. That you're featured in the back of the book too, so if you want to find it.
Why you call Wednesday Child?
Wednesday's Child is full of work, and we're working on a Wednesday.
Create a space for, well, initially Wednesday Child was created a space for women to have safe space to discuss their mental health, and we just wanted to kind of reframe that idea and kind of, you know, a lot of, when we found that we had this safe space that we were talking about anxiety, depression, and actually something really positive came out of that, and that we kind of wanted to be like a girls or women's mental health group and being supported and like that, and how we want to keep everything inclusive.
So if anybody wants to come up, we've got lots of inks and we've got lots of tools, and that's one more question. Yeah.
I've got one more question for you. To what extent have you started to introduce some of your ideas into early years settings and into primary schools? It seems to me that there's a lot of formal-based artwork that goes on in school. I think, you know, there'd be a lot of power in what you do, especially connecting it to emotional well-being and emotional expression for children.
This is something that we'd be really interested in doing. Currently I'm working in a Pupil Referral unit, so that's a much older year group, it's not early years. And I'm using these techniques, albeit a bit modified, with those young people. The idea of kind of having paper everywhere is something that works really well. I have one young man who can become very frustrated and get quite aggressive quite quickly, and he is always looking for ways to rebel. He's always looking for ways to have negative attention. So a lot of teachers were like, oh no, we don't get paint out with him. We don't get this out. And I was like, well, why don't we? Because I've got a roll of paper from IKEA, and we can cover the walls, and we can cover the floor. And I had a big dust sheet from the pound shop, and he was like, look like CSI in here. I was like, well, the computer's safe. So that's all. I mean, he would look at me as he put his hand on the paper and walk to the wall, waiting for me to tell him off. And I was like, go for it, you know. But no, that is something I would love to do. The way that we've been practicing this mainly has been work with a small group of homeschooled children, several of which had autism, and this was something that I was able to kind of develop there with their carers, because they were very on board. So yeah, going into schools would be amazing, so if you want to make that happen, come to it.
We do actually run workshops in Manchester, but they are generally more based on women's mental health, and it's called Making Mind Safe, and we have guest artists coming in. And although this talk is about children, we are using the exact same practices, not necessarily mark making, we do all different kinds of crafts, but you know, these practices centering and breathing, that, you know, often having something to do with your hands. We have a motto that's busy hands let brains breathe, and often something to do with your hands can help make you feel productive, having something to go home that you've done in that time. You might have learned a new skill. So we are running workshops in Manchester, and we would love to do more with children in schools. Yeah.
Wonderful. Anyone else for questions? This is just such a lovely topic. We're all good now. Did you say participation?
Yeah.
Good.
You see there's a lot of people here, but we have some tools. We have some pink ink and black ink on the side.
Okay,
and
so
these are all homemade tools.
Amazing. We have 10 minutes to play.
Yeah, so anybody...
Before lunch. Does anyone want to come up and play?
Sorry, you can look at the stalls, you can come up here, just all kind of mingle, and then when 12 o'clock comes you can have lunch, but get a batch before you go off.